Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this episode, we're going to take a look at my new favourite list for the Death Guard, the dreaded triple Dreadclaw Drop Pod. Quite hard to get that out, but I managed it. So let's dive in, take a look at the list, some key strengths and weaknesses, and a few other analytical points I've picked up from playing the list. First up, we've got a Supreme Command detachment with the Lord Primarch himself, Mortarion. So it's a 0 CP detachment, and it does refund you the CP you would spend on the subsequent battalion. So that's costing me 1 CP because I am taking the Warlord traits on Mortarion. Now, I have been running the list as Mortarion's Anvil, the third plague company. And that's not really for any reason other than the stratagem, but I have been taking Gloaming Blow as the additional Warlord trait that Mortarion picks at the start of the game. I think it's by far the strongest to chuck onto Mortarion, but as far as the rest of the list, I think you can definitely make an argument for the stratagem available to the Inexorable being stronger, in that you don't always need to support each other with Heroic Intervention, but adding 2 to the charge will not always be relevant. Sometimes you want to get charged, particularly with the rest of the list, as we'll explain. But for those charges where you're like, no, I don't want an extra unit coming in, the Heroic Intervention isn't always available, but adding 2 to that charge distance could be relevant. So whilst Gloaming Blow definitely on Mortarion, every time I've played it, you don't necessarily need to go with the third plague company for the rest. You could do just as well with an Inexorable, I would say. So next up, we've got a Battalion, so it is Mortarion's Anvil in this case. We've got a Plaguecaster with the Plague Skull of Glyphilla, so that is the 2nd CP spent pre-game. And we have also got Typhus. No upgrades, of course. Typhus can't have any unless he's Harbingers, and we're not Harbingers. Now, could run through the spells here. You've got enough Psychers to have all the spells. You can know 7 spells total from the 3 casters that are there, so you'll probably take all of them. You don't have to, of course, and you will probably use the Smite here or there as well. The only important selection, I think, is just really having Miasma of Pestilence on Mortarion, so he can give himself -1 to hit. But besides that, it's really up to you. The troop slots are 5 Plague Marines, kitted out as follows. Champion with a Fist and Plasma Gun, 1 Flail, 1 Cleaver, 1 Mason Axe, and 1 Blight Launcher. If you prefer something over the Blight Launcher, you can certainly swap that out. I think the others are probably going to be a staple pick for most people's 5-man Plague Marine squad. And then filling out the rest of the troop slot, we've got 2 10-man squads of Poxwalkers. They are purely there to spread the sickness and to hold objectives in our side of the board when the opponent is unable to threaten those objectives. The elite slot, we've got 2 squads of 4 Death Shroud and a 3rd squad of 5 Death Shroud. None of them have upgrades, but you have got the additional free Plague Spurt Gauntlet on the champions. And then lastly in the elite slot, we've got the Foul Blight Spawn upgraded with Viscous Death to give him the ability to reroll his amount of shots on his sprayer and take it up to strength 8. And also Revolting Stench Vats to give that 6-inch aura of you don't count as charging. So whilst he does give 1 unit within 3-inch in the fight phase, fight last, you would give everything within 6, you don't count as charging. So not only does that remove potent abilities from factions like, say, White Scars get extra damage, Blood Angels can get extra +1 to wound. They're not going to be getting that because they don't count as charging. But functionally, if you've got 2 units that got charged by a unit each and one of them's now fighting last, the other one, you can still fight with that unit first because your opponent made 2 charges, neither of them count as charging, and one actually is fighting last, so they just hand the initiative to you. You attack the one that's just not charging first, then they'll hit you back, and then you attack the one that's fighting last, and then, again, if they've survived, they can hit you back. So it just adds some supreme durability to your Death Shroud or Plague Marines, because they're always getting to hit first in that scenario, but also it really just mitigates those sort of high impact effects that certain armies have on the charge. Finalising the list there, we have of course got 3 Dreadclaw Drop Pods. So the plan for those is 1 includes 5 Death Shroud, and then the others include 4 Death Shroud, 1 with Typhus, and one with the Malignant Plague Caster and the Foul Blight Spawn. The Caster and Spawn are not Terminators, so they don't take up a double slot like the Terminators do. The pod itself houses 10, so you can have them 2 and then 4 Death Shroud. So, key strengths. Well, the obvious one is the turn 1 deploy into the midboard, creating an immediate threat for the opponent. Now, we will come back to the weaknesses, and they are around countering that. You are investing reasonably heavily in the drop pods for the ability to deploy them in that way. And in that regard, you're essentially exponentially, if I can say it, exponentially magnifying the speed of your Death Shroud and your characters, because they would otherwise take a few turns to get to that position. Now they're an immediate threat there, turn 1. So at the bare minimum, getting that extra movement. Playing Nephilim is all about movement, being on the objectives, being able to strike into them in your first turn is very, very strong just for winning on points. But as we've said, it also creates an immediate threat if you're striking them in on objectives near the opponent's line. Secondly, it allows you to easily hold those points for primaries, both scoring the main aspect of the primary, hold 1, hold 2, hold more, or hold 2, hold 3, hold more. And it also lets you score the bonus on a lot of primary aspects of the mission, whether that be hold the middle objective, have a character in the middle. Generally, I think that's actually a warlord. So, of course, Mortarian's not going to strike in. He will be the warlord, but he's got the movement to get up there by turn 2, really. So perhaps not the one where it's warlord in the middle, but otherwise, hold the middle. Yeah, you can do that. Hold more than the opponent. Generally, you can do that. Hold an objective that the opponent was previously holding. They perhaps won't take it off you, but that's like mitigating their ability to score that. So again, in all aspects of the primary, it makes it very easy to play. The units you're striking in, including the drop pods to a lesser extent, are extremely durable. Versus most opposition, they leave only bad decisions. So yes, your opponent might have a lot of melters, but D6 damage into Death Shroud isn't great because it's a 50-50 whether that shot actually kills the Death Shroud. And say you've got 6 shots and the first damage you keep rolling a 1, 2, or 3. The second shot is essentially not a melter shot anymore because it's just killing the injured Death Shroud. So whilst you're not going to want to eat 6 or 12 melters to the face, it's not the worst position to be in given the data sheet, the profile available for your army. And there's an awful lot of 4-up invuln here with Armour of Contempt. So even if they are hitting you with major AP, which is pretty common now in the age of Armour of Contempt, but even if they're hitting you with that massive AP to try and chew through Armour of Contempt, unless they can ignore invulns, you've still got a 50-50 on the save for a lot of these units. You've also got mass amounts of psychic powers. You've got a total of 6 casts and a total of 7 known powers. It does give you the option to take psychic secondaries if you want to, though you will be giving up the casts for that caster. So if you're planning on that, you might want to include a Demon Prince to be your secondary caster, because they've only got 1 cast anyway, so you're not giving up as much, and they have, of course, got that melee threat as well. But I have found myself occasionally going, yeah, I'll take the psychic secondary and I'll just use it on the caster. If you're doing Psychic Interrogation, you can get some CP out of it, which is pretty nice. If your opponent's got some relatively low leadership characters. Otherwise, if you just wanted to do the ritual in the center of the board, that's only 3 turns that you're giving up the casting on. Potentially more if your opponent denies, but certain armies can't deny, in which case that's a relatively easy 15 points. Or is it 12 points max? Either way, max points on that. So yeah, key strengths there is that you can really, really oppress virtually any army as long as they don't play to counter you. So on that vein, what are the key weaknesses? Well, going second is a pretty key weakness. If your opponent is going first, then they can move out. Even if they've not got any other movement shenanigans, they're going to be able to block you out of probably half of the board, if not more, which does mitigate the strength of dropping in so many units. So, of course, that's a pretty big weakness because you'll only go first half the time, roughly. So I can't really call this list competitive when it's hampered by that quite significantly. The bigger weaknesses, though, are pre-game moves So not only if your opponent's going first would that be bad, but they may be able to pre-game move in such a way that it's artificially like they're going first in terms of their ability to screen you out. But on top of that, infiltrator units and outward deployment units can effectively screen you out without the need for a pre-game move and without the need for them to go first. All of those things are going to be fairly commonplace in a competitive game, in that you won't go first every time, so you've got to be prepared for going second. But pre-game moves and infiltration units and outward deployment units are such great ways to play Nephilim in the fact that movement is so important to Nephilim, that you are going to see them in competitive lists, not specifically to counter drop pods or teleport strikes or what have you. It's an added benefit that they counter those things. The reason they're there is to play the game, and of course you should always be expecting your opponent to try and play the game, particularly at a competitive level. So the fact that those are the three main weaknesses and the fact that they will be so prevalent is a limitation for this list. Another massive weakness there is transhuman. You've got a lot of big strength profiles in that list, and of course you do reduce toughness with your contagion range. So any sort of army that has a lot of access to transhuman effects, Dark Angels with a lot of inner circle terminators. I did have a game against Dark Angels. Whilst I did win it by crushing on primary, the Deathwing Knights were a real thorn in my side. If it wasn't for the Plague Skull of Githilla and a good turn of Psychic, I would have really struggled to remove them. Even Mortarion doesn't get through them that well, although if he does get something through the armor save on his heavy profile, it is a kill. So yeah, mass access to transhuman-like effects will hamper your ability to crush the opponent. However, that doesn't make them any better at killing you, besides the fact that they may have more models making attacks. So, if you've got the... the Gift of Contagion, where it's, -1 strength and potentially -1 attack. I have that on the Plague Caster there specifically because against a big blob of strong infantry, whether it be Deathwing Knights or something like that, taking an attack off them, as well as getting them in Gloaming Bloat range and stopping any rerolls to hit and wound, can be a massive factor in you not taking the punishment that you otherwise deserve for running such a gambit as this. So overall for me, it has been very fun to play it. I don't think it's that fun to play against. It is a very oppressive list unless you have the answers, and playing it at like a casual friendly level, not everybody's going to have the answers. At a competitive level, your opponent will likely have the answers. Many competitive lists outside of the Death Guard, because of course we don't have those shenanigans, but many competitive lists will either have the option of a pre-game move in the form of a stratagem, so they can always do it if it's relevant, or they will have units that do it specifically because they do it. And again, infiltrators, outward strike, it's just so common, particularly for Marines. Incursors and infiltrators are in every Marine list I build, one or the other or both. So, against a list I would build myself, it would struggle. So you can't overestimate the power you'll have in terms of deploying them, but that's not to say that the Dreadclaws are wasted in that case. The Dreadclaws in and of themselves, you're not bothered about making a 9-inch charge. If you make it, you make it. If you don't, you don't. Put them down in a position where you can attempt that 9-inch charge, and if you can make it into a vehicle, yeah, it's only 4 attacks on 4s, but if they do get through, it's strength 12, AP 4, and flat 3 damage. I have had games where they've dealt with imposing vehicles over the course of 2 turns because the vehicle couldn't do anything back to them. It wasn't designed for melee. I've also had them deal pretty well with infantry, Chaos Space Marine Possessed, even killed a Deathwing Knight with an attack there. So yeah, there's a lot of play in the Dreadclaw Drop Pod beyond just deploying them. Making use of that movement to use the Thermal Jet ability and get more mortal wounds out of it is very, very good. Overall, you've got a lot of ways in this list to deal mortal wounds. You've got a lot of options for Overwatch in the form of the Death Shroud Gauntlet, and the Foul Blight Spawn's an excellent Overwatch user. So you put your units in a position where your opponent's forced to charge them, if you can, by putting them on objectives, and then you're ready to strike back with an Overwatch. You're ready to strike back with a Fight Last and a No Charger. and you've got all these psychic powers coming out the wazoo. Even if you're just doing a smite for everybody, yeah, it gets harder to do each time, but it's not unreasonable to expect a 7. You know, it's going to happen a lot of the time. So even just throwing out a smite each, the trio of casters you have here can really put a number on any army, really. And the armies that do have that protection, you know, in terms of like 5 up, feel no pains to mortals, Black Templars spring to mind. You know, armies like Black Templars, they've got to play you at your own game plan. They have to come in and fight you. That's what they do. So anything that has an immunity to one aspect of the list, you know, they might be quicker than you, but they can't outrun psychic powers and they can't outrun drop pods very easily. You know, that's fine. They're probably not very good in melee. So if you do hold the objectives and they've got to come to you, you'll probably beat them up. On the other hand, if they're capable of holding out the line and taking that beating, they're probably not going to be able to do well into the psychic powers. And it's sort of a, you know, rock, paper, scissors of you can't be good at everything. And this list does a variety of things pretty well. The only thing it doesn't do that well is shooting. But because you've got that delivery and that, you know, place of importance, you know, you're on objectives, the opponent has to do something about it, because you can't expect to just shoot down 13 Death Shroud and 3 really durable characters. 4 really durable characters, really, I suppose. You can't just expect to shoot them down quick enough to not lose on primary. And if you've built the board with a bit of terrain, a bit of obscuring around that central objective, which I would always encourage, they have to come at you or create an angle to actually take those shots, at which point you can collapse on them with Mortarion, with the Plague Marines, maybe with the Poxwalkers, and just invalidate that threat and retain those 3 objectives for even longer. So for me, whilst yes, it does have some very key weaknesses, Mortarion is the answer to that in a lot of ways. If you are going to deploy right up to my line, you're 9 inch away from my line, Mortarion's guaranteed to charge you, because unless I've got a 3-story ruin where I can actually obscure Mortarion a little bit, not from every angle, but you know, if it is a tall enough ruin to, you know, have him side on, not let his wings poke out too much, you can stop your opponent shooting you a bit, and as a result of that, you might be a bit further back. But if that's not an option, you might as well just have Mortarion on the front line. They're going to shoot him either way, so get him up close, and if they have deployed some infiltrators, that's 120 points or 100 points, whatever it might be, in the bank for Mortarion right away. He's going to kill them. He's going to pile in round the back of them. Pile in round the back of them, kill them, and then consolidate towards the enemy lines, maybe even getting him to that central objective, along with the rest of the boys that will be looking to push up. You might not have been in the position to deploy the drop pods in mid-board if that's scenario, but again, they are going to be able to make that advance next turn. They will be able to get on the objectives. Because of the Blight Spawn, you're actually not reliant on making charges. You're happy to take charges. And because Fleeing Vectors scores every turn, not just your turn and, you know, back to the next battle round, you can score it on your turn, you can score it on your opponent's turn. So if they do throw something into the Death Shroud, maybe they only tag them. You know, they go, well, I was actually after charging Typhus or Mortarion, but I'm going to tag these Death Shroud now with my pile in. Yeah, that's fine. I might only be able to get the one Death Shroud in, or maybe a couple of Death Shroud in, but now I can use my stratagem to make you -4 leadership and score myself potentially 3 victory points off the back of you failing morale, which is very nice. Otherwise, you can just force your opponent to spend some CP. Very, very good. Besides that, though, there aren't an awful lot of stratagems to use for this list, to be fair. You haven't got the number of bodies on Poxwalkers to really make Mutant Strain viable. You can still do it if you need a few extra mortal wounds, but without them being able to reroll, you are risking killing them too. And there's just not enough bodies to make it really worthwhile much of the time. So you can revive them in your command phase, and that's worked for me pretty well. The majority of the CP has gone on Overwatches. The odd reroll when a save really matters. It's like if I do save one of these, there's a Death Shroud alive. If I lose it, and it kills the model, and then the next hit you make, if you can get D6 damage on it, you could kill another Death Shroud. So I would always try and leave a Death Shroud on 1 wound if I can, just to make it awkward that you don't want to shoot melters or las cannons into the squad. You know, your opponent will still have to sometimes, and it is what it is, but you know, that can be very important. Just making one of those 4-up saves can be really, really relevant. And besides that, it's really only like +1 to hit and wound on the Death Shroud. There's not really a lot of stratagems coming out of it, which is why I feel like next game, I will probably switch it to Inexorable and have the -2 to charge rather than the Heroic Intervene, because I just never really found myself using it that much. And when I did, it was just overkill. Because a lot of the time you'll be sort of placed on the objective or just off it, in a way that you actually, I don't want to heroically intervene because it'll actually drag me off the objective a bit. And at that point, I'm making room for you to come in and get on the objective with some obsec bodies that might then score you the points instead of me. So yeah, quite often I found myself not actually wanting to heroically intervene for whatever reason. And when I did, it was like a free heroic with Typhus or, you know, what have you. So so yeah, it doesn't feel that relevant to go with Mortarian's Anvil. Unless you want to take Warp Insect Hive. As we've said, if you're planning on going for a Psychic secondary, you might want to cut the Plague Caster, but then if you want in Wings, you're still going to have to find like another 90 points, which is, it's a pretty big ask, to be fair. The list is like so gravitated towards what it does that it's really hard to remove a model from it at this point. If I was going to make the list more competitive, which you might want to do, I would definitely say you need to cut one of the drop pods. You can probably afford to cut one of the Death Shroud squads at that point as well. Maybe have some Blight Haulers in there. Maybe have some Plague Burst Crawlers in there. Maybe even like another set of troops, really. You know, maybe another squad of Plague Marines, some more Poxwalkers, just to give you that longevity in the objective control for those units. But I do think 1 or 2 drop pods is a really good pick for Death Guard. In the games where your opponent can't deny the entirety of no man's land and they leave you a space, it doesn't matter that they've denied you from the middle. If you can get a squad of 5 Death Shroud and a drop pod 9 inches away from their deployment zone near their objectives, they've got a lot of questions to answer there. You know, do they deal with a drop pod first, or do they risk it dealing mortal wounds and then charging stuff every turn? Do they deal with the drop pod first and risk leaving all 5 Death Shroud alive to come in and just muller whatever's left standing on that objective and have a really tough unit to chew through? The important things to consider is where terrain leaves you obscured, and prioritize those objectives which leave you in a position of being obscured whilst still on the objective and in a position to ensure your opponent can't get on it. In those positions, armies with any element of fighting will look to use that and will look to charge you. And then, as we've said, the Foul Blight Spawn, if he's nearby, positioning very, very important. But if he's nearby, even just giving that you don't count as charging is just a massive incremental toughness buff, as well as allowing you to score a good amount of points on fleeing vectors and potentially both parts of it, even with the leadership, as a result of them fighting first. Well, I'm going to stop rambling because I think I've said the same thing a couple of times there, but it's hard to get it right all in one go. And I do like to do these just off the cuff, which is why I sometimes get things wrong. But as it goes, I think with this list, everything I've said is correct. So thank you all so much for getting involved. Whether you want to leave a comment, a like, a sub, it always really means a lot to me to see, you know, how the videos are getting liked relative to how many viewers. Comments to get involved with. I always really enjoy reading your comments and getting back to you. It really makes my day. And of course, we are getting close to that 1,000 subs. I am going to do a giveaway when we get to 1,000 subs. So if you're not already subscribed, if you want to get us one step closer to that, you can. And of course, it costs you nothing, and it would really mean a lot to me. So thank you so much for that if you do. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.